Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us in class tonight. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Andrea. How are you tonight?
Good. A better day today. I love when we have a little bit less stress. It's just such a strange, weird time of my life. I know that at some point I will look back on this period of my existence and realize, that class was in session every moment for me,
Mm.
that I had to find a place in me, a part of me to search. Um, in a way, I think that it just reaffirms and reestablishes my own identity. But you had sent me a message earlier about finding your true identity in service to others.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening to me right now, which
Mm.
is why I think that was on your mind so much today. And I,
Yeah.
I would like to, have you go off on that um, at will. But before that, you had mentioned just discussing the concept of why Soul School exists, how we, for lack of a better word, conjured up the idea to do a show together like this,
Mhm.
and what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah. Excuse me. Well, I'm glad. Pardon my voice if I sound a little scratchy tonight, y'all, and or if I'm a little sniffly, because our Michigan weather is insane, and we were like in the 70s, and now we're like in the 30s or 40s again, and it's wreaking havoc on
Upper
my sinuses.
respiratory
Yes.
system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I was thinking, I was just thinking about the concept of soul school, right? The idea of soul school as a concept, the concept being that we come here to learn, that Earth is, in a sense, a classroom. And before even talking much more about that, by the way, I'm glad you had a better day today. We didn't really get to talk too much before, but I'm glad you had a better day today.
Thank you.
You and your family have been in my prayers and in my thoughts, and I know that's true for everyone watching as well. So I'm glad to hear that. But anyways, um, the concept of soul school, the concept that we come here to learn, the concept that we, depending on what culture you come from or what tradition you come from, that we even in some belief systems subject ourselves to this reality in order to learn, right? And I think it's important to note that whenever we're talking about mythological belief systems and structures, one doesn't have to subscribe to these things in any kind of literal way for them to be significant, right? So, really, the way that I practice most of my Christianity is a metaphorical, mythological approach. I'm not very hyper literal when it comes to any of it, but I think we all need to admit, and admit's a weird way of saying it. I think we all need to realize that we live in a mythological structure, and that's what our ancestors were. They were trying to communicate through the myths that they gave us. They weren't trying, it wasn't like a bad attempt at science, you know what I mean? What the myths that were handed on to us by our ancestors, handed down to us rather by our ancestors, it wasn't them trying to figure out the world from a, a rationalist mind. It was them perceiving things about the cycles of life and the journeys of life and putting it in story form. And so that's why these myths resonate with us so deeply. So one doesn't have to believe literally, the idea that we are sort of pre-incarnate spirits who then incarnate ourselves as human beings in order to learn a lesson. One doesn't have to believe that in any kind of a literal way
Mhm.
to know the power of seeing oneself in that story, whether one thinks it's real or not, right? There's a great line from C.S. Lewis, one of the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe series of books. I can't remember which one, but the character Puddleglum is asked, what if there were no Aslan? He said, if there were no Aslan, I would still follow him and serve him. I would still be a Narnian, even if Aslan didn't exist, because Aslan represented something noble and powerful and worth following, even if Aslan wasn't a real being in his mind. So any kind of story like this, whether it's true or not in the sense of literal truth in that sense, doesn't matter. It's a myth is a truth that is truer than true. It's truth that can't be spoken in the way that we speak in the modern world, right? So the idea of us being at one point in our reality, a sort of pre-incarnate spirit that has lessons to learn, that has things they need to know. And so we incarnate ourselves in this reality numerous times in some belief systems until we really learn and we reach that state of, nirvana or satori or whatever you want to call it. It's a useful belief system, whether or not one believes it literally. And I was thinking today, even how this is reflected in the Christian story of Jesus, because I see Jesus more as the archetypal human than anything else. Like, he's the ultimate example of what a human could and should be. And his journey is sort of a map we can follow of our own journey. And the story of Jesus, in the Christian context at least, is that he's with the Father in perfection as a divine being, as God, prior to being incarnated as a human being, right? And then when he becomes a human being, interesting things begin being said about him later by the apostles. Things like he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And one has to ask, how can one who is omniscient learn anything, right? How can one who is omniscient learn anything? But it says, because you and I have flesh and blood, he took flesh and blood so that he would be just like us in every way. And then he learns obedience to the things that he suffers. And that always boggled my mind when I was approaching scripture from a more rational perspective, trying to understand these things literally. Like, what is that talking about? But I love the idea too. And I'm sorry, I can't talk about this stuff without going off on 10,000 things, but I promise we'll bring it around town.
No, I know. We always do.
Yeah. But I love the idea of God is divine perfection. God is divine I amness. God as eternal. So whatever it is that God is, God does not become, because God just simply is that thing. God does not exist in time as we exist in time. So whatever God is, God just simply is. But when God inserts God's self into the timeline, what happens to God in time defines who God is in eternity. It's just simply that timeline in eternity never happened the way that we see it happening. It just always has been. So what God subjects God's self to in time defines who God is as an eternal being. So yeah, to say that to say that he learns obedience through the things that he suffers doesn't mean that God is necessarily learning the same way that we learn in this timeline, but that what God learned in this space of time informs who God has always been. And that's always just been a mind-boggling thing to me, that the omniscient one, the one with all knowledge, has to subject itself to one with no knowledge, right? To be completely dependent on what it is he is taught by other human beings, whom he, in this context, created and gave a brain to think and learn and know in the first place. It subjects himself to the learning process that they undergo. He learns from them. He learns from their stories. And ultimately, it says through the things that he suffers, he learns obedience. So this being who's supposed to be holy and perfect in every way learns what it is to be obedient, whatever it is that even means, through the things that he suffers. So this archetypal human is a divine being who becomes a human being, suffers, learns lessons in the process of being human, and what is learned here informs what was always true there. It's such a mind-boggling concept to me, and it's one go ahead. I saw your
It just occurred to me. Well, all right. It occurs to me that one of the most interesting journeys that an all-seeing, all-knowing being, would take a human form to experience humanity, get to a point of self-awareness where he is fully connected with himself as being part of the creator, and yet going through this journey that's different for every single one of us. None of us have ever had duplicate lives, ever. And in that individuality, I think there is something to be learned, to just, like you said, like an experiment, like, oh, let's try this out and I'll impart what I can before I go. And I think that the notion of virtually surrendering to
Yeah.
one's suffering is to know the human condition,
Yeah.
to understand that none of us get out of this unscathed, none
Mhm.
of us get out alive,
Yeah.
none of us are left untouched by the joy, the rapture, the grief, the sorrow, the pain of life.
Yeah.
And so for Jesus to be able to impart true wisdom in terms of how we could, not necessarily even should, he made no demands, but
Mhm.
how we could live with each other and love each other powerfully, as pure and resonant and simple a
Yeah.
concept as it is as complicated as it is when it is folded into the mix of the recipe bowl of humanity,
Yeah.
where some don't spiritually evolve at all.
Yeah.
In fact, they regress into something heinous and ugly and dark and evil.
Yeah.
And some are like walking light beings on
Mm.
the planet
Yeah.
and everything in between.
Yeah.
And I say all of this knowing that everything that I am saying about it is just part of a split second new vernacular that we have just invented, interpreted, and are taking these archetypes, this mythological journey that humanity has been on, and transforming it, inserting it into the World Wide Web, reaching out
Mm.
to people literally all over the world, which even 40 years ago we couldn't do with ease.
Yeah.
100 years ago, you were lucky if you had electricity in your cold water flat,
Right.
you
Right.
know, and the blink of an eye. And
Yeah.
all of this life has changed. So we can only see this life that we are living framed in the circumstances in which we live it.
Mhm.
Um, we're not living in Sudan right now, wondering if our family's going to be blown up any second in our little hovel of a home, what's left of what we had. There
Right.
are people that are living vastly different lives who have vastly different belief systems all over the world. But it seems to be having a belief in something is what
Mhm.
drives us forward in terms of our fascination, our curiosity, I mean, there are cynics among us who would look at all
Mhm.
philosophy, all
Yeah.
religion, and say, that's all made up. That is all made up, all of it.
Right. Mhm.
And so just live in the moment and live your life right now, and try to be the best idea that you have of good, and call it a day when you draw your last breath.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. No, and, I would say good luck with that. Well, and
It's
I've
not
tr
fulfilling to me. I need
no,
meaning and fulfillment in my life. I need
I
to,
yeah.
and I'm a Libra. I can't help but compartmentalize and assign
Yeah.
certain meaning to certain things.
Yeah, and you know what? I think we're meaning-making creatures,
Yes.
that's who we are, and that's what we are.
Mhm.
That is a feature of this particular species of primate, All species, all species of primates have features that are specific to them.
Yeah.
We traded body mass for brain mass, and in the process, we developed this desire for meaning, right? And here we are, we have it. And it's what we are, and it's who we are. And in the same way, you can't tell a male orangutan who lives a typically solitary life until he's mating that he needs to get out and socialize more. That's just not in him. That's not who he is. He lives in solitude. That's part of what it is to be a male orangutan. Okay. And in the same way, what it is to be a human is to be on a quest for meaning. And even those who want to take away the quest for meaning and say, no, life has no inherent meaning. And so to pursue it is bollocks. Well, they have found a kind of meaning in the taking away of meaning. That is a kind of meaning that they
It
found.
is. And in the
Yep.
same way that being an atheist is a belief system, the belief
Yes.
system being that God does not exist in any
Right.
way, shape, or form. And the universe just is. Deal with it, move on, enjoy your life, die.
Yeah. It's a belief system. Yeah. And that's part of what Nietzsche in the Gay Science, when he talks about the madman who comes during the daytime with the lantern looking for God. And he's like, I'm looking for God. And it's the atheists who are mocking him, saying, oh, you're looking for God? Well, what, did he go on vacation? Is he on a trip? Is he taking a bathroom break? What do you mean you're looking for God? And he's like, God is dead and we've killed him. Don't you guys understand? And they're like, ha 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 ha, laughing it up at his expense. And he's like, I see I've come too early, because he came during the day with a lantern, expecting it to be dark, because he realized that, see, people think that when Nietzsche wrote God is dead and we have killed him, that he was chortling like some kind of demonic troll, gleeful as he wrote it. He was heartbroken. Now, Nietzsche was an atheist, to be sure, and he certainly was no fan of Christianity. Just read his book, The Antichrist, if you want
Yeah.
to see and hear about his feelings on Christianity. But he also knew you can't just pull the skeleton out of this body and expect it to stand upright, right?
Mm, yeah.
He knew that if you just take this structure away from us as a species, well, we're gonna melt into a puddle on the floor. You can't just think you can pull the rug out from underneath all of Western civilization and everything's just going to keep going. And so his project was to try to give us something alternative. That was really what he was aiming to do with his philosophy. Whether or not he did that is, I don't think he did, but he tried, and it was more than most people were doing. But like, I love the image of the madman, the quote unquote madman, who comes with a lantern during the daytime, because he's like, oh, I've come too early, because you have not yet seen the effects of what you've done. You've not, he's like, thunder and lightning take time, I believe, is one of the things he says. So like, you see the lightning, but it takes a minute before you hear the thunder, depending on how far you are from the event. And so you haven't quite seen what you've done will result in. And when you just take belief and meaning away and say, like you said, oh, just live in the moment. What is a deer out looking for meaning? Is a squirrel or a raccoon out looking for meaning? They're just squirreling. They're just deering, just human. It's like, but again, a squirrel is squirreling, and a squirrel is squirreling when it's gathering nuts for the winter, and a human is humaning when it's gathering meaning, because that's a feature specific to this species of primate that we happen to be. So you can't take that away and expect there to be no consequences, right? There will be consequences. And so
Yeah.
I think in this era that we're living in right now, well, and I guess actually now we're starting to even get into the identity thing a little bit, I suppose,
Mhm.
because it does seem like everyone's in a mad scramble for identity these days, right? And whether it's political, religious, whatever, we're all looking for personal identity, right? But and I think that's a result of not having this larger structure. Now, in the Western world, it was Christianity. Um, after Madame Blavatsky and that sort of esoteric revolution, there was all manner of other more esoteric Eastern religions that people began to identify with and treat in the same way they treated Christianity, because we're Christians by nature. So even when a Christian converts to Buddhism, they're still kind of a Christian Buddhist. You know what I mean? They treat it the
Yes,
same way.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So then
You
when we
can never not be Christian.
really, I mean, it's just in you, in the same way, which I've often wondered, because the Western atheist is very much an evangelist for atheism, right? And I've often wondered, and I really don't know. I wonder what one with maybe a more Eastern philosophical bent, who isn't who maybe loses belief, what atheism would look like in that context, because I've never quite seen it. I don't really know, and I'd be interested to see what that looks like. I don't know, but you can't ever really get rid of that flavor. It's in there. Um, but when kind of post enlightenment and all that kind of stuff, when we really see the death of God, as Nietzsche called it, um, people began to just push all of this stuff away. But nature abhors a vacuum, and there's now a vacuum where you once found meaning in this structure. Well, there's a vacuum there, and what's going to fill it? And we turn to politics, and that's always tragic. Whenever you try to fill that sacred space with something so easily corrupted. Don't get me wrong, religion can be too, but the symbols within religion, that's the pure
Yeah.
thing. It's not the
That's your thing.
yeah.
Yes.
It's not the structure that built itself around it.
Right.
That's always corrupt. But the symbols that religion is sort of the steward of, that's where you can find something pure to hold on to. But we turn to politics, different regimes, different ideologies, whatever, and we're looking for identity. And I think now in this day and age, we don't have a corporate identity, whereas before, like I said, it was just like you were a Christian by default. And there was kind of this corporate identity everyone had. Whether they were devout or not, that's a different matter, but we kind of had this corporate identity. Now, I'm not saying that's positive, but it's just, again, it's just what that just happened to be the tree these primates were living in at the time. It was just, you know what I mean? And then we had to leave that tree and we have to adapt to a different kind of life. And so now I think we're trying really desperately to find that in all different kinds of things. And maybe some of it's healthy, maybe some of it isn't. But I know for me personally, when I left my the specific brand of Christianity to which I was beholden behind, I did go through a season of really trying to figure out who am I then without this? Who am I without this version of Christianity? Who am I without this mission that I believed I was born with? Who am I without this calling that I believed was on my life? Who am I without a relationship with this particular version of God that I believed I had had a relationship with all of my life? Who am I without all of this?
Yeah.
And you can really drive yourself mad looking for that. And maybe you'll happen upon gold, looking for it. But I think more often than not, what I see people do is make a lot of really bad mistakes and hurt a lot of people and hurt themselves in the process, And that's not to say we shouldn't try to find ourselves or anything like that. There's a time and there's a place for that, and that's part of the hero's journey. But the completion of the hero's journey is that the hero returns home to serve the community he left behind, right? I mean, that's the completion of the hero's journey. He finds himself in the process of leaving and all of this loss and all of this darkness and all of these battles he faces, but then at the end of it, he returns back home to serve that which he left behind initially. Now he can be of service because he's found himself and he's discovered whatever. Now he actually has something to give. So I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I've just been thinking a lot about the idea of just taking responsibility for the space of earth you occupy and finding your identity in service to that, and how much more rewarding that is than just being in this mad dash to find yourself. You know what I mean? Because it seems to me that's just not something anyone really finds. It's like the proverbial bar of soap in the shower you're trying to hold on to, and and you just live your whole life going like this without ever really getting a grip on anything, right? But man, there is some. Listen, the Sanskrit idea of God, Sat Chit Ananda, which means being, consciousness, bliss. All of those things can be found in service to others, and therefore I think that really is a good definition of what God is. God is service to other people. That's God made manifest, right? And I find so much more reward in being a responsible, loving, caring adult with the heart to just serve than I ever found just trying to find myself in these books and this. And I love. Don't get me wrong, this is fun too.
Oh
But at
yeah,
the,
I
but at
know.
the, but at the
Books.
end of the day, yeah. But at the end of the day, you exhaust yourself trying to find yourself in all this, and then in a simple moment of doing something very simple for someone that you're not even really conscious that you're doing anything of great service. That reward comes back and you're like, oh, what was that? And I was reading. Oh, sorry, you were going to say
No,
something.
that's okay. I just wanted
Yeah.
to say that every book I read, I'm an accidental tourist.
Mm.
Every book I read, I find I stumble onto something brilliant and beautiful and mind bending and a little bit life altering.
Yeah.
Each journey that I take through each book that I choose to read to enrich my life.
Yeah.
And I'm talking, predominantly about philosophy.
Yeah.
I have my favorites. I have a real feelings of deep commitment to ideas that I was exposed to by choice at a very young age. I don't know another sixth grader that read Emerson's essays.
I don't
That's
either.
not typically what a sixth grader would delve into. And it changed my life.
Mm.
It did. Circles changed my life.
I just was reading Circles again today.
I know. I told you. I suggested it to you a couple of weeks ago too. But I think that our whole structure, our whole system, we've advanced so rapidly as a society. And hold on to
Mhm.
the thought that you had. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no,
Hold
please do.
on to it, make a note, and we can pick right back up. But
Mhm.
I just wanted to interject this. I think that um, we quickly built uh, a structure in our society, in American society. And of course, it looks different from village to town to city to state. But collectively, one America, we live in relative comfort and ease,
Yes.
have access to pretty much anything that we might want or need. Our desires are fulfilled relatively quickly compared to other people around the world.
Yeah.
And so we almost have uh, a we have a space that is afforded us to think about our space that we occupy on the earth.
Hmm.
We have uh, more freedom than others. We're not out groveling for food or trying to find a well that isn't spoiled.
Hmm.
We are bitching about the price of gas. Not that it's not available, but we just don't want to pay that much for it.
Right.
That. Okay, so we have really high class problems. That has been coupled with an, an undermining and a fracturing of a structure that was too quickly constructed, just like a building that goes up too fast and the foundation of it has not been given the full attention that it deserves to support a structure
Yeah.
this big, this broad, this wide, and this heavy.
Hmm.
And so we have got to reinforce our foundation. And
Yeah.
what shook it up, I think, was a combination of COVID and myriad other things that all happened. 2020, we always talk about 2020 hindsight.
Hmm.
Well, it would have been good to have some 2020 foresight
Hmm. Yeah.
when it arrived because everything changed till my last breath. I will devotedly talk about the paradigm shift and what this period of time in the course of human history and evolution represents. It is the shift. It is, are we going to change our minds? Are we going to enrich and enhance our minds and grow our minds and be more self-aware, be more conscientious and cognizant of the needs of others, put ourselves out into the world at a time when we're being told to retract so
Hmm.
that we're safe and don't breathe the air of others?
Hmm.
And what steps are we going to take forward in terms of the momentum of the society at large? Now that's microcosm. Macrocosm is what is happening to all of humanity
Hmm.
right now. There's as much, if not more, suffering than has ever occurred on the planet. What
Hmm.
have we learned about wars? What have we learned about nuclear weapons? What have we learned about our ability to take care of each other? What have we learned about spreading love instead of hate? What have we learned? Why
Hmm.
do we, at 9:30 at night on a Friday night, ET, Eastern
Hmm.
sit here and talk about these things with those who are tuned into us, who are turned on by this kind of conversation because it is spurring new thought and
Mhm.
a structural change to each and every individual mindset, which collectively heals the planet in some incalculable way. It's prayerful, it's soulful,
Mhm.
it's part of going. It's one little tiny class in a 24/7 schedule that never changes. I mean, you're in class while you're asleep. Your dreams are informative. Your visions, your lucid thoughts
Mhm.
that actually can increase your heartbeat rate. No, I mean, this is interactive vessel here
Mhm.
that is here to learn. Jesus, perhaps perfection,
Mhm.
came here in the form of a little baby and had to grow up and learn the ways of the world and the ways of humanity, and then
Yeah.
put those notions together. And gee, how would this work out better and better for humanity if they would just love each other instead of hate and kill each other? And
Yeah.
maybe you can talk to them about that. It was pure, it was simple, the message was clear and succinct. And the first thing that happened after the death of Jesus Christ was the corruption of his message and the
Mm.
founding of a religion on this planet,
Yeah.
Christianity,
Mhm.
that resulted in, little episodes like the Crusades, where 10 million plus people were
Yep.
murdered, usually tortured first and then murdered, so
Mhm.
that they suffered as much as possible if they didn't avow their devotion to Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
many of whom had never even heard of the man, never knew he existed. So, I guess the bottom line question that I have for you is, what have we learned? Are we evolving? Are we spiritually maturing?
Mhm. Yeah. I think I think yes, but the structures we are embedded in have not.
Yeah, they're not holding up.
And I think when you get down on the individual level and you talk to the individual human person, they are always far better than the systems they are devoted to. Right?
Espousing, yes.
Yep.
Mhm.
They're always better than that. I've never met, well, I won't say I've never met. Let's just say this. Most Christians I know, for example, are far better than their beliefs allow them to be. When I'm just speaking to them human to human, many of them would even say, like, man, I hate the fact that hell exists. I hate the fact that people burn in hell for eternity, but it's true. Like, that's the mindset. I'm like, wait a minute. So you're saying
Have
if it
you
was up, yeah, it's like if it was up to you, such a place wouldn't exist because you're such a compassionate, kind person. But God, who was supposed to represent ultimate kindness and compassion, apparently sees this as being an okay thing and is presently stoking the fires that are tormenting billions of departed souls just a few miles beneath your feet. It's like they're better than their beliefs allow them to be. They themselves, by saying something like that, by saying, I hate that this is the truth, but it's the truth, by saying that, they show that they're better than their beliefs allow them to be. And so I think, yes, as a species, as individuals, we have been matured. Whether we want to or not, we have been in some way, but we are enslaved by systems that serve as governors on our moral and spiritual development. And so, even though we as individuals might be, so long as we're a part of those systems, we're not expressing the truth of who we really are underneath. And so, even in terms of Christianity, as corrupt of a thing as it was, and in many ways still is, there were always the pure ones. There were always the mystics. There were always the hermits. There were always the ones living in monasteries and living in little hermitages
The
who
transcendentalists,
right,
yes.
who were, and they're in all faiths, right? They're in all faiths, but there are
Yes.
always those ones, who've broken away in some way from the monster that is the whatever structure it is that's claiming that religion as its own. They've broken away in some way, and they've retained the archetypes and the symbols of that system, and they've repurposed them, to inspire them to live a life of kindness and compassion and service and other-centeredness, whereas the system says all of those things, but it does the opposite. And so I do think we have grown and we have matured, but I think it's the systems, be they political or be they religious, that will always serve as that governor, that limitation on the truth of who we are actually becoming. And so I think it's the systems, these powers that be, that need to be spoken. And if we're liberated from these systems, that the truth of who we really are can come forth. But so long as we're beholden to these things, so long as we're enslaved by them and ensconced in them, we just don't grow. We don't manifest the truth of who we really are. I do think, though, humanity as a whole has been upgraded. Even the more orthodox view of Christianity teaches that what Jesus did wasn't just something that if you pray this prayer or if you believe this way, you can partake of it. But until you believe this way or pray this way, you're separate from it. Orthodox Christianity always taught that what Jesus did reset everything and changed everything and transformed the whole of humanity. And it's the belief system only serves to help you understand the truth of the great reset that's occurred. And so, however, if one thinks it happened there or whatever, it doesn't matter to me. I do think a great change has been wrought in humanity, but it's the systems that corrupt. It's the systems that pull
It
us
is,
down.
and so much of what we are supposed to hold up as the institutions for good are the antithesis of that,
Absolutely.
and are corrupt and are built on a flimsy,
Yeah.
fracturing foundation of greed.
Yeah.
And greed could be our downfall as a species.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a race, of
Yeah.
as a human race, could be our downfall is greed.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I have always found so absurd, because not one human being throughout the course of all of human history ever got to take what they accumulated in life with them.
Hmm. Yeah.
We are born naked, we die and disintegrate, or we just go home.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know where home is, but it is in the transcendentalist movement some form of transformation which occurs that is energy based, that is soul based,
Yeah.
and that we connect with the great one.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it kind of as like divine mind, like all of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, as a philosophy student, as someone who holds a degree in the study, that just about sucked the life force out of me to get, because my brain exploded. I had so much incoming information from so many different perspectives, studied every major religion in the world in order to achieve that goal, which was for some reason very important to me. Um, I I took it in as each and every element of it as this is interesting and that is interesting, and always thought of it as all of it is relevant.
Yeah.
All of it is relevant because all of it already pre-existed in consciousness, and we just tapped into that consciousness to develop that idea, to develop that theorem, that hypothesis, this theory or that theory, that then then developed further.
Mm-hmm.
And you can watch intellectual evolution occur, even if you just size it down to, let's say, just from today through the last 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
can watch clearly what has been uh, dug up,
Mm-hmm.
literally, anthropologists and archaeologists and people that uh, search for their search for meaning is in the history of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so what they give us is this bedrock of information about how we have evolved, However, we've evolved to the point where we're so self-destructive that if we do not come to some terms of endearment with ourselves about what we want this world to look like for future generations or exist as an inhabitable planet at all, this is the time that we need to make those decisions now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And throw down the gauntlet and
Yeah.
say, this is it. This is the paradigm shift. I'm assigning it this meaning. It is obvious to me by my own observations of what's been happening in, I would say, the last 10, 12 years, that we are there now. We are at the point and on the precipice of major change
Yeah.
that's happening in this world. The introduction of AI into our
Mhm.
society is going to change everything. Everyone needs to be prepared for this. You are
Yeah.
going, anything that you watch, listen to, and engage with, you will no longer know if
Right.
it's real or if it's a computer. If
Right.
that imagery is of a real human being talking to you, or if it is a computer talking to you.
Yeah. No, I just the other day I was messing around with some friends and we opened, I don't know if you've ever used Chat GPT, but it's basically just an AI. You chat with it and you can ask it anything and it'll, so I was like, okay, you got to see how crazy
It
this thing
makes
is.
shit up too.
Yeah,
It gets a lot of
it does.
things wrong.
Oh, it certainly does. And but I was like, okay, write me 5 paragraphs concerning Carl Jung's ideas on the coincidentia oppositorum. And it's like, blink, 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 boom, 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 5 paragraphs. And I read it and I was like, that's actually pretty damn accurate. And they're like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, but you could have turned that in as a term paper and no one would have known. It did get one quote wrong. I had to check it on there and it was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. It but yeah, no, it's absolutely insane. And absolutely insane. And this is definitely a part of the revolution. Whether that's good or bad, I guess is to be seen. You know,
To be announced. Yeah.
yeah. And as you were talking about all of this, it's like, this is, I mean, this is like the AI is like the nuclear bomb. You know what I mean? In a way. And every time there's like an introduction of like a new earth changing sort of technology, world changing technology, there is a spiritual revolution that happens alongside of it, right?
Alongside of it. Yeah.
Always. If you go back to, anytime I talk about the UFO phenomenon, I always tie it back to what happened near the Trinity site, just weeks after the detonation of the first test bomb. That's where the first real UFO crash that was publicized and really kind of kickstarted the movement. It's where it happened, right near that site. Is that coincidental? I don't think that's coincidental at all. And it created a new fascination with something different. And it always takes me back to Terence McKenna. Whether you like Terence McKenna or not I don't care. He was a brilliant man. He was, where he said that he thought he compared Jesus to a flying saucer, is what he said, and he used that language, flying saucer, because that was what was more used at the time. But
Yeah.
he said that Jesus was a kind of flying saucer because he arrived at a period of time where humans had perfected the art of barbarism. We had literally created a form of torture that needed to have a word created to describe it: excruciating, the pain that comes from the crucifix, from the act of crucifixion. And we were possibly, when you look at the development of mathematics at the time, we were possibly centuries away from actually being able to realistically travel into space in the first century, if you look at the development of mathematics and stuff at the time. However, there appeared this lone figure in a country the size of the Florida Everglades, right, who works miracles and speaks in parables. And the next 1,000 years of human history, instead of exploring mathematics and possibly developing the sort of technology we have today, but that would have been in the hands of individuals who had not quite evolved morally as much as we have evolved today. I mean, I mean, it would have been disastrous. We probably wouldn't be here anymore. But instead of that happening, for the next 1,000 years, the brightest minds, quote unquote, spent their days poring over dusty tomes trying to figure out if Jesus was of the same being and essence of the Father or something else. And it's like these concepts that to us seem like they just don't even mean anything or matter at all. This is what the brightest minds were spending their time doing. And so like there was this great technology developing, and there was a humanity that was not ready for it. And so what happens? This spiritual phenomenon occurs that takes our eyes off of what could destroy us and places our eyes onto something that has the power to liberate us if we'll follow it where it's actually taking us, and and averts those disastrous whatever. And you know, the same thing, I think that's part of what the UFO phenomenon was and is it's something, it's man, it's trying to catch our eye and call us higher than this that we're so eager to destroy, it seems.
Yeah, and I think if we're really making any progress at all as a race, that has a great deal to do with it. And you know, interesting. Hold on, we only have a few minutes left, but I really, really want to mention this.
Yeah.
Okay. I went into my mom's room earlier today, and I realized she'd been shuffling around her National Geographics, and I found this. We are here. Now, people who watch A World Awakening or even this show regularly will probably remember that I got a very profound message on February 24th of 2022 when Russia went into Ukraine. And the message that I got was, if we are here, this planet and its people are in crisis. We are here. And I knew that a lot of that had to do with me, like I was part of the we. And that is part of my identity. I know that I have a profound connection. I don't understand it. I may never understand it, but it's real, it's there, it's pure, and my attachment is permanent. I know all of that. So, and then a year later, Zelensky does recorded commentary about 1 year and marking the anniversary of the beginning of the war, the hostilities, the conflict between these two nations that really began as one. And he ended his commentary with, "We are here." Like we have stood up to the aggressor. We have faced down, you know, the whole David and Goliath thing. Russia should have, you know, had that whole country within, I think they predicted 3 weeks. And the beat goes on, and the bombs keep dropping, and the people keep dying, and the children have no future, and their lives are cut short. And that's just one of many, many places on earth where this kind of thing is going on right under our noses, and we're not responding to it because we're so busy trying to shore up the foundation of our own society right now that we're not paying attention the way that we need to about the whole rest of the world, the global, the exo-political. And the one equalizer that I see that is coming into play here is the release of more information about UFOs over Iraq, for instance, UFOs over the Crimean Peninsula, UFOs that are being spotted in South America, you know, all kinds of new sightings and information that's coming out. And I feel that this is a pivotal part of the paradigm shift. I know that something huge is coming. I just haven't been made privy. And then I pick up to all of it. But then I walk in my mother's room and I look down and I see we are here. My mother was fascinated by that article because it was about the indigenous people of America reclaiming their land and their heritage and going back into the archetypal history of who they are in their own personal identity as a tribe, as a group, as a nation.
Yeah.
And the photograph is taken in front of something that looks remarkably like Devil's Tower in Wyoming. It's not, but the desert, and that's where the crash was. And all of that came full circle for me in a split second. And I thought, why do I keep seeing these three words together? We
Mm.
are here. And
Yeah.
so we are. Here we are, all of us
Mm.
together in soul school, finding our way out of the dark into the light and bringing it back to your original premise. I
Mm.
got here too soon. I'm
Mm.
carrying a lantern in broad daylight. Nobody can see it. Sometimes you have to wait until it gets dark before
Yeah.
you can really see the light.
Yep. Mm. And the amazing thing about these signs that are undoubtedly occurring, right, is that it gives us the opportunity. Here's how I always think of it. It gives us the opportunity to project the contents of our own souls outwards and see
Mm.
them reflected back to us on the surface of whatever the sign is that appears, right? And if the message that's coming back is we are here, when we personalize that message, what could that say to us? We are here, but then it projects back down to us, we are here.
We are
That we
here.
look around and realize there is no they, there's only we.
There's only way.
And
There
so
is
who we,
only way.
and so when we destroy the other, we destroy ourselves.
Ourselves.
And when we serve the other, in some strange way, we serve ourselves.
And
Right?
when we heal the other, we heal ourselves.
Absolutely. Yep. And
And
so the great, yeah. And
I
so
know
there's the full circle message in some way,
there's
isn't it?
the full circle message, and this has been one of my very favorite
Mm.
classes. I always learn
Mm.
so much from you, my dear,
Same.
dear friend.
Mm.
I love you. I love you all. Thanks for coming to class, for sitting in front, for taking notes, for opening your hearts and your minds and your soul so that we can have these shared moments during our sojourn. And
Yeah.
with that, I say to all of you, class dismissed.